let's look at like an emerging artist that has, let's say, 500 monthly listeners.
Mm-hmm.
An artist at that stage, those are 500 real listeners, but that's not converting into any real revenue for the artist.
Right.
The average artist is spending $50 a year to distribute their music to
Mm-hmm.
DSPs. Most of them, 86% of them, aren't making any of that back at a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
But with Even, the average album, we're seeing sells between $15 to $25.
Mm-hmm.
So the immediate people who are going to buy it are your immediate community, right? Let's say you have 20 supporters, pay $20, that turns into real revenue. All of a sudden, you just made back your distribution costs. You just made back, or you now have an investment fund to run ads with using a symphony or working with a breaker to hire some influencers or a groover to like get some editorial looks. And that's what we're seeing. The number one question that we get from that emerging side of artists is, all right, I just made money. What do I do with it?
What's going on? Welcome to the New Music Business. I'm your host, Ari Herstand, author of How to Make It in the New Music Business, the book. Third edition is out now. All formats, audiobook, ebook, hardcover, however you like books, you can find it. Today, my guest is Mag Rodriguez. He is the founder and CEO of the direct-to-fan platform, Even. Now, this is the first interview in a new series focusing on these direct-to-fan or superfan platforms, however you want to call them. This is where the industry is heading. The last 10 years has been all encompassed around streaming, maybe the last 15 years rather, and streaming has been great for fans and discovery and exposure and all of that, and it has single-handedly brought back the global recorded music industry from the death spiral that it was in the early aughts. And now the industry is thriving at kind of the macro level. The major labels are doing great. But we see that artists with superfans cannot monetize that fan base on streaming alone, or really on streaming at all. What they're making from streaming revenue is not good for artists with superfans. It's great for artists with passive listeners, but if you have if you just have a hardcore superfan base, you can't monetize them through streaming as it stands right now. So these superfan platforms are starting to pop up. Today, I interview Mag from Even, and future episodes, I'm going to feature some other ones. Now, we don't have full disclosure. Well, there's nothing to disclose. I do want to put this out there. Sometimes we partner with companies. As it stands today, we have not partnered with Even. I'm just a fan, and I'm trying to highlight all these superfan platforms. So if you know of a superfan platform that you want me to have on the show and you think they're doing some interesting things, please let me know. I'm open. At this point, I want to have everybody. I want to have this conversation. I think this is a really important conversation to have. Hopefully, this is first of many that we are going to have as an industry and I'm going to have on this show. So Even, they have worked with artists like J. Cole and Black and LaRussell and Ryan Leslie and thousands and thousands of others, French Montana, of all levels, DIY, independent, self-release artists, all the way up to, of course, J. Cole, who's on a major. And Mag told me that they're onboarding 8,000 artists every day. So they are definitely a big player in the space. And this episode, mostly, I ask him how Even works and how artists are using it. And he tells me really interesting stories of how artists who don't have that many fans, maybe only a few hundred or just a few thousand monthly listeners on Spotify, are making significant revenue directly from their fans via the Even platform. And it's very encouraging. And so whether you decide to use Even or another superfan platform or anything like this after this is up to you. But I think eventually we're all going to be using some kind of direct-to-fan platform. And, there's been many out there over the years, like Bandcamp or Patreon or even Kickstarter is a form of this kind of direct-to-fan mechanism. And I reference all of them. And we talk about kind of how this era that we're in right now and why these platforms are different from those aforementioned platforms or crowdfunding as it was once known, or even patronage, and kind of how that all works. And so we've evolved as an industry, and more of these music-focused superfan platforms are popping up. Very important. Really fascinating conversation. We definitely got into the weeds of how this is working. I think it's definitely worth looking at Even or one of these other platforms and trying it out. You can find Even on the website. It's get.even, even.biz. You can also find them on the socials. You can find all of us that make the show happen at Ari's Take on the socials. You can find me at Ari Herstand on Instagram. But right now, if you wouldn't mind, just pause this. Leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the follow. Hit the like. All of that if you want these episodes to continue to populate your feeds. But most importantly, visit aristake.com and get on the email list. That is where you're going to get the most up-to-date, relevant information about the new music business. That is the best way for us to stay in touch with you. aristake.com. Get on the email list. All right, let's kick into the show. Mag Rodriguez, welcome to the show.
Man, thank you for having me, man. I'm excited.
For sure. So, for the uninitiated, give us a background, however you want to go about it, of what Even is, maybe why you started it, why you felt it's important, what the platform is. Give me, for those of just hearing about it for the very first time right now, set it up.
Yeah, no. Thank you again for having me.
For sure.
Big fan. But yeah, so my name's Mag. I'm the CEO, founder of Even. We're a direct to fan platform. We're essentially, well, depending on who you ask, we're either a direct to fan platform or a super fan platform. I think they're very much the same.
Do you prefer one term or the other these days? I guess they're going in and out of vogue as we speak weekly, but yeah.
I'm starting to embrace the super fan title.
Okay.
But yes, essentially what we're doing is we're helping the industry sell music and experiences directly to fans before it goes to streaming platforms.
Cool.
So you'll hear me talk a ton about like the new parallel economy and really this opportunity that I think has been available in the market, but no one's really embraced it, which is how do we monetize music before it goes to streaming in a way that makes sense for fans and it makes fans feel good about, their purchase, but it ultimately grows the pie for the industry. So it's not even or streaming, it's even and streaming.
Got it.
So that's essentially a little bit about Even. I'm not sure how deep you want me to go into it.
No, that's super helpful. And just so I understand it, when you're saying sell music before it goes to streaming, I mean, this has been something that has been attempted by a lot of artists historically in the industry. We would call it windowing, famously like 10 years ago or something like that, Adele windowed her album for months, kept it off streaming services because she knew that she could get people to purchase the CD at Target or whatever. And like Coldplay windowed their albums. I mean, a lot of people used to window. Nobody really, I shouldn't say nobody because clearly you guys are doing it now successfully. But I feel like that lost prevalence, like the windowing. Most people have been incentivized and encouraged and maybe brainwashed, if we want to go a little aggressive about it, from kind of the streaming platforms, at least that we should put it all on every platform on release day. And we have been taught or maybe trained by the DSPs that you want to do that because when people are going to search for your music, and it'll warm up the algorithm on Spotify and whatnot. And if it's fragmented and people are buying it here, then there's not as much action on Spotify, and the algorithm isn't trained well. Or I don't know. How do you speak to that, or what are you seeing in your corner right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you bring up Adele, you bring up Coldplay. I think Ryan Leslie, Nipsey Hussle. There's so many different examples of this idea of going direct to fan before streaming. I think the biggest difference is 10, 15 years ago, the promise of streaming was still very early. This idea of growth that I think jumping into a brand new format of like we're skipping streaming was a little bit too aggressive for the market at the time. And it also didn't feel sustainable. I think now enter, 2024 into 2025, streaming is plateauing, right? We know growth is now shrinking. The next 100 million subscribers are going to be the most expensive to acquire, but also retain. All the numbers just kind of stack up where this growth that was promised didn't really hit and really meet the expectations, right? We're
Yeah.
still only 50% of the way there than where we were 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you're hearing the terms of like streaming 2.0, and you kind of, is it easier than ever before to make music and release music and get put in front of people? Yes. Is it
Mm-hmm.
harder to monetize than ever before? Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
I believe that both things can be true.
Mm.
And I think the idea too is, when Adele did that, when Ryan Leslie did that, this
Mm-hmm.
is pre, e-commerce really like hitting, its stride. We
Sure.
look at what Shopify did for e-commerce around the
Mm.
world, and that's really what we want to do for music. When I
Mm.
describe what Even is to most people,
Yeah.
I talk about Even as we want to be the Shopify for artists. We want to be the Shopify for super fans. This idea that you can now build an infrastructure around yourself, because the truth is, when we think about windowing, it's been seen as like a naughty word as well, right? It's
Yeah.
kind of like we never use the word windowing internally
Sure.
for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
We see it more through the lens that 5 years ago, it was Apple versus Spotify.
Mm.
Now, that's not the case anymore. Streaming platforms are no longer fighting with each other, whether we want to believe that or not. They're fighting for attention. They're fighting for the attention that we're spending on TikTok, Instagram Reels. You can't listen to music and scroll through TikTok at the same time. And
Right.
we're talking about billions of people versus hundreds of millions of people on streaming platforms. And when we think about how that's impacted the industry at large, discovery is now happening on social media. It's
Right.
not happening on playlist anymore. So when we start just thinking about basic economics of like how you run a business, converting fans from discovery on social media to a third of a penny on streaming just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
It makes a little bit more sense to focus on discovery and then convert them into dollars within your community, and then let everything else build on top of it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm fully on board. And I think the streaming experiment, I think it is settling into what we can all understand its usage, and that, it's almost like a loss leader for a music career. It's just like, sure, there are some artists, mostly labels, that are generating significant revenue from streaming. But the artists, what we have found, as this is kind of shaken out over the years, the artists with diehard fans are unable to monetize that fan base just from streams. Whereas historically, if you had 1,000 diehard fans and they all bought your album for $10 or something, that's $10,000 that you now get from those fans. Whereas like now, if you have 1,000 diehard fans and they all stream your album 10 times, and let's say you got 10 songs on that album, that's 100,000 streams. That is nowhere near livable.
Yeah.
You're making like $300 or something like that, maybe. So I totally on board with all of that. Now talk to me how this works. How does Even work? How are you transitioning fans from streaming, or I don't know if you're transitioning or how you're thinking about it, but like, I think that we all discover it's like digital downloads have died essentially. Like no one is downloading anymore from iTunes really, and that has fallen. It barely even registers on the global revenue scale. But you're talking about sales. What are you selling here, and how have you been able to convince fans to pay for music again?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's interesting, because when I think about the art, I'll get to the answer, I promise.
Sure.
But you
Yeah,
brought up a
please.
couple of things that I think
Yeah.
are so important. I
Okay.
think one, I think the music industry at large gave up on digital sales too early.
Okay.
I think and a lot of it has to do with the fact that we often forget that the platforms that we rely on, and by I say we because I was a former manager, producer, etc. They're not music companies; they're tech platforms, and tech
Yes.
platforms are designed based on growth. It's all about growth, 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 distribution. We'll figure out revenue later.
Yes.
We did a lot of that, which is amazing, because streaming has proven that it's been incredible for global exposure, right? Like
Yep.
distribution, you can't beat that, right? With streaming, a million, every song ever created in your pocket, like you can't beat that.
Yeah.
But it did affect the margin in music, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we think about just margins, and like, you used to sell an album for $15, the label can at least count on 40 to 60% of that being margin on that.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're counting margins based on thirds of pennies, which, and it turns into the challenge that we're in now. But when I talk about what we're doing is, on paper, we're selling digital albums, digital songs. That's what we do. That's how we report to Illuminate. So when we report sales, they're essentially digital albums, digital singles.
Okay.
Now, the interesting thing is, if you really ask me, what are we selling at Even? I never say music. I say we're selling access. We're selling community. And the idea here is, what does Fortnite sell, right? Fortnite doesn't sell you a video game. They don't sell you skins. They sell you an experience that you can gamify, customize, and ultimately you're building community, right? Like my 12-year-old little brother met his best friend playing Fortnite. He never paid for the game, was free, but he spent probably thousands of dollars of my credit card buying these skins to impress his friends. So I think it's that same model where, like, on paper, Epic, Fortnite, these are video game companies. Even technically, we're a music tech platform. But what we're really doing is we're offering the infrastructure for artists, labels, distributors to sell access and proximity to fans, to their favorite artists, but more importantly, to other fans. There's this kind of, we call it the even triangle. It's artists to fans, fans to other fans, fans back to the artists. It's just kind of like this triangle effect that happens. And a lot of that is rooted to the fact, back to my initial point that we gave up on digital sales too early, is that when iTunes launched, only 3% of the global population had ever purchased anything on the internet. Now, fast forward to 2025, 30% of the global population buys things on the internet every single day. Right. So that number, right, this idea of selling a digital asset wasn't necessarily there, or a digital good wasn't necessarily there 25 years ago, and then we just started thinking about just retail and physical products and touring. Like, what is a global tour, right? We're talking about US, Europe, maybe Australia, maybe Brazil, maybe Mexico City. There's still billions of fans who are underserved, who will never have the opportunity to interact or be in the same room with their favorite artists, but more importantly, other fans that love that same artist. And that's really the ecosystem that Even offers, an infrastructure that offers to our artist partners and labels, where they can now sell this high margin digital product that turns into community, and you enter X, Y, and Z, they can essentially turn that experience into that. Hopefully that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And I find the community aspect kind of the most enticing and fascinating. I want you to speak to that a little bit more, this even triangle of, I think we can all understand artist to fan. We see that every day on social platforms and whatever. But you're saying then fan to fan. How does that work?
Yeah, so the way that it works is, I'll give you an example. We have this ongoing campaign right now with J. Cole. So we launched Inevitable, which is essentially the world of J. Cole, where we transformed his traditional website into a fan engagement tool, which is essentially what Even does. So fans showed up. The initial offering was a 10-episode audio series.
I saw that.
So it was cool. It was like 15 hours of content. It was $10, pay what you want, and you could pay $10 or you can go above and beyond. And what was interesting is fans just showed up thinking, I'm going to hear the story of J. Cole through the lens of J. Cole, his manager, and his director, Scott.
Right.
But what's interesting is they showed up and they immediately found a community chat. And I'm not talking about a third party like sending them to Discord. There's just a community chat that's very simple, easy to understand, where now 4 months later, there's still fans there every single day talking to each other.
Wow.
It's probably the closest thing you can, I think it's like the AIM chats. It's like a kind of like a public chat that just kind of has like a life of its own.
Yeah.
But, we brought in fans from over 150 countries. So you can log in at any given time of the day, and there's people in there talking to each other, just because they might be from different parts of the world. And then from there, we launched the digital album. So we launched the 10-year anniversary of the 2014 Forest Hills Drive album, which included 8 additional songs that weren't released 10 years ago. And you can only buy them through Inevitable, which is powered by Even. And again, the fans found out about it because they were there for the audio series. Now they're buying a digital album. And then that turned into the physical CDs, vinyl, of that album. And then it turned into a one night at Madison Square Garden where the pre-sale was only available through Inevitable.
Wow.
Then they did the live stream to the Madison Square Garden show, and that was also through Inevitable. Then he launched his blog. So it's like this, he essentially continues to build on top of this like world. But he, what we've been able to do is we remove the complexity of like, I think we heard about it maybe like 3-4 years ago of like every artist should have their own world, right?
Yeah.
But we immediately jumped into the metaverse. It was like VR and NFTs. And for us, it's like, let's make it very simple. This isn't a
You're not built on the
thing.
blockchain here.
We are blockchain enabled, but we don't talk about that publicly.
Okay.
But yes, we are blockchain enabled on the back end, but we use the technology the same way that we use like AWS and Stripe. It's just infrastructure. But the opportunity, I think, for us, it's like, how do we build something very simple to use, very simple to understand, and very simple to engage with?
Right.
And that's essentially what we've been able to see now. So that gives you a lens of the community where there's there's fans talking to each other. Cole has jumped on the chat. Eve, his manager, jumps on the chat. Scott, the director of the audio series, jumps on the chat. And then there's, of course,
when you say the
blog.
Chat, sorry, not
to
interrupt, just so I understand it, and for people that are listening that have not experienced it necessarily, are we, just to visualize this a little bit or maybe help what this looks like, are we talking about like comments underneath a video like we would see on YouTube and that's the chat? Or are we talking about like an old school message board chat, or does it look like more like Discord or AIM, or what does it look like when we talk about the chat?
It's like an AIM. Think about AIM. I think that's like a perfect example of it. Cool. It's one directional, right? So it's not like different chat rooms.
Yeah.
Now artists and teams have the flexibility to create multiple rooms, but what we found is like, that's where a lot of Discord communities have kind of gone to die. It's like too much,
too fragmented.
Why?
Sure.
Yeah. You need one place where communication can happen. There's a conversation that's ongoing.
Cool.
And that's essentially how it operates, but it's very simple. We did introduce badges, but again, we didn't take it to the extreme like what we've seen in the past. Our the only badge with Inevitable, very similar to some of our other campaigns, is if you gift the release or the experience to another fan or friend, it unlocks a little badge that's customized. So for the Inevitable site, it's a little plug. It's like a pop culture, like, you're the plug for giving me this. So fans started buying it for other fans, just so they can get the little badge next to their name. Cool. So again, we take elements, we simplify them, and we essentially, present it to the end consumer in a way that it's very simple for them to understand and very simple for them to access.
Now, are all of these members on these communities, are they paid subscribers, or are they just somebody who bought one thing once?
So they're paid essentially. This isn't the payment format can change depending on the release. Artists and teams have the flexibility. Is this a one-time payment? Is this a monthly subscription? Is this a yearly subscription? We have started to introduce the yearly subscription. That seems to be the most sustainable one for creators, where instead of like $10 a month, it's like $20 a year, and you're a part of my community. So for Inevitable, it's a one-time fee. So the audio series was $10 minimum. The album was $10 minimum. The physical CD was $14. The vinyl was $46. The live stream, you got access to it if you either bought the album or the audio series. So everything lives behind. Yep.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, everything lives behind the paywall. Essentially.
So you need to make one purchase of any kind, and then you get access to this community?
Correct.
Got it. And give me some other examples. I mean, I looked into the J. Cole Inevitable. That's what it's called, right? Inevitable.
Yep.
Right. His platform a little bit. But he's a superstar, and I think we hear a lot of these stories of superstars succeeding at something, And I think everybody listening to this is not a superstar. And where we got a lot of like, indie
Yeah.
artists and managers that are like, well, that's cool for J. Cole and even, but can this actually help artists that are not superstars? Give me some examples or speak to that of artists who are succeeding on even, who we may never have heard of, I may check out their Spotify profile and they're nothing to, their numbers are not something that are going to be turning heads necessarily, but you're
Yeah.
seeing that they're having significant success on even.
Yeah, I mean, man, we have thousands of those. I mean, every week now. It's so just for context, we're onboarding 8,000 artists a day. So
Wow.
it's like,
Congratulations.
yeah,
That's amazing.
it's people say congratulations, but it depends on the time of the day that you ask me. If you
Yeah.
ask me
Good
first
luck.
thing in the
Sorry,
morning,
strap in.
oh yeah, literally.
Right.
No, so yeah, I will say most of what we do. So just for context, we launched out of beta April of last year. And
Okay.
we turned down a lot of like big superstar releases post launch, mostly
Mhm.
because we were focused primarily on the emerging sector,
Okay.
which makes up about 90% of what we do. Like we love working with the big artists. It's great to kind of lead with, so it kind of gives people a sense of like, okay, J. Cole trusts you, like this is a real thing.
Sure.
But what's really interesting is we help artists make their first $100, their first $50, their first $1,000 every single day.
Mm.
And the idea here, there's actually a thing I shared today. Someone posted on LinkedIn, and they tagged us in it, where their artist made 400, I think it was like $440 with 30 sales. And this was in a week. This is more money than this artist had ever made in their career from
Mm.
music,
Mhm.
which is 30 fans. So the average fan paid $14, more than a monthly subscription, to listen to a 6-song EP
Yeah.
before it went to streaming. And what's interesting is, when we look at, let's look at like an emerging artist that has, let's say, 500 monthly listeners.
Mhm.
An artist at that stage, those are 500 real listeners, but that's not converting into any real revenue for the artist.
Right.
The average artist is spending $50 a year to distribute their music to
Mhm.
DSPs. Most
Mhm.
of them, 86% of them, aren't making any of that back at a minimum.
Mhm.
But with even the average album, we're seeing sells between $15 to $25.
Mhm.
So the immediate people who are going to buy it are your immediate community, right? Let's say you have 20 supporters pay $20, that turns into real revenue. All of a sudden, you just made back your distribution costs. You just made back, or you now have an investment fund to run ads with using a symphony, or working with a breaker to hire some influencers,
Mhm.
or a groover to like get some editorial looks.
Mhm.
And that's what we're seeing. The number one question that we get from that emerging side of artists is, all right, I just made money. What do I do with it? Because we
Mhm.
also pay out daily, right? So you make $1,000 today, you have access to that money today.
Right.
And I think one of the big misconceptions, people think is like artists get $1,000 and they're just like, I'm going to go blow it on something. And the truth
Mhm.
is, the number one question inside of our customer support is there any promo agencies that you can refer me to?
Mhm.
Or is there any marketing companies that we should work with? And that's
Yeah.
really where we started to partner with some of these like Unheards and the
Mm.
symphonies, as I mentioned, where like they can go and work with these companies to like help grow their reach. There's a case study that we've been keeping a pretty close eye on. There's this artist, she's out of Houston. I won't share their name just for privacy, but when we started working with her, she had 4,000 monthly listeners on Spotify,
Mhm.
and she ended up making $30,000 on the platform. And this was across 2,300 fans. So the fact that she had 4,000 plus monthly listeners, but she was able
Wow.
to catch momentum and sell a couple thousand albums.
Yeah.
She ended up making I'm sorry, not 2,300, it was like way less than that. I'm butchering the numbers on that one, but she
Okay.
ended up making $30,000 on the platform off of her first project. uh, Fast forward a year now, she now has 80,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. And
Hmm.
what we saw is when we met with the team, she's actually in the middle of a rollout on the platform. She's at like 20,000 in revenue on her second album on the platform. We're projecting she'll make between 40 to 50,000 by the end of the campaign. But we asked her, like, how did you grow your numbers? And she was like, I started filming content. I was able to pay for my music videos. I was able to, do X, Y, and Z, where traditionally she didn't have the access to.
Yeah.
And these are stories that we see all the time, right? These artists that are, for the first time in their career have some money that they're making back that they can now reinvest into their career.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, hopefully that makes sense as far as like some of the
No, and
use
that's super
cases.
helpful, and it's encouraging to hear these artists that might have 4,000 monthly listeners, which would not turn any heads on the label side of the industry, but generating tens of thousands of dollars from real fans, that turns my head. That turns, I think, everyone's head, because it's like, you know, s- right. You mentioned giving up on sales too early, maybe. I think, like, for so, Bandcamp has been around forever. I mean, since 2008, I think, pre-streaming, Bandcamp has been around. And I think every indie artist has found maybe a little bit, like, have had little wins here and there, maybe with Bandcamp. It's like, oh, I was a super fan that, spent $200 for my new album on a pay what you want. And it was like really helpful and encouraging and all of that. Um, and there's a decent community there. I think what maybe Bandcamp missed out on, and maybe they'll find, is the community aspect, like you're mentioning, is just like there hasn't been that dialogue or fan to fan when we're talking about that triangle. But I also haven't seen people run serious kind of campaigns like this. I'm curious if maybe you could go a little bit deeper on how this artist with 4,000, monthly listeners, which I'm assuming it's way less than the 2,300 like mentioned, be like, it might be,
Yeah. I looked it up.
yeah, okay, how
It
many?
was 1,600 fans paid $20 for her album.
That's amazing. I mean, still, getting 1,600 fans to pay $20, that's a lot of people, for someone with 4,000 monthly listeners. I'm like so fascinated at how she got that many people, because I'm thinking about like running crowdfunding campaigns or selling records on Bandcamp or whatever. Most artists with those numbers, are breaking their backs to get like a couple hundred people to back their crowdfunding campaign or something like that. How are you seeing these artists break, like these small emerging artists get 1,600 people to pay them $20 for something that if they just wait a few weeks or something, they can just get for free on Spotify?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we call emotional commerce
Okay.
internally at Even, and it's pretty close to like conscious consumer. I think that's you bring up Bandcamp, right? I think when I often talk about Even, I tell people Even is what Bandcamp should have become.
Mm,
And, I think just by design, Bandcamp has become a bit static and, they've made a lot of attempts to try to like modernize, but the community kind of fights back a little bit. And that just happens when you build a brand around like a certain ecosystem, I think, with or niche communities within like music.
sure.
But I think what's really interesting around like how this artist and we see other artists do it is it's such a captivating story to say, hey, am, I made this album, there's 16 songs, and streaming doesn't pay me well, right?
Hmm.
If I go to
Hmm.
streaming, it's going to get lost. And I want to make sure that I reward you for buying this album. So for, every campaign we see artists do everything from you buy the album, you get I don't know, you get the music videos, you get invited to my release party.
Mm,
Most artists are doing like a release show. So like you get a free ticket to the release show. So they try to kind of like bundle it with stuff that they're already doing. Our best
hmm.
practices are always, we don't want this to become extra work. Let's just take everything you're already doing
Yeah.
and connect it to this album.
Yeah.
And what we see is like the algorithm isn't linear. So when you're just pushing stuff into the algorithm, people might miss it. But if you start to connect it into one world, it's a very clear and easy opportunity to be able to kind of gather people into one rollout. So this specific release, I pulled it up. She did the album. She did a T-shirt for the highest tier. You got an invitation to her release party, and then
Hmm.
you got invited to a virtual release party. And everything that she was doing every step of the way, she started like really promoting and creating content and running ads as she was getting access to that revenue. She not only grew her monthly listeners, she also grew her followers by like tens and thousands of followers. Because I mean, look, that's how the algorithm works, right? Like, as long as you feed it and you really boost it, and then the content is captivating and it feels authentic to the audience, that's really what ends up connecting. Now, not every artist is that way. We also have artists that are like the artists with the capital A, who are like, I am not an influencer. I am not going to be creating dances on TikTok, but my music is really strong, and I want to make sure that the people around me actually listen to it. We have an artist in London. We just did a case study on him. He sells $1,000 album every time he releases. He ends up selling a couple
$1,000 album.
No, like he sells a couple hundred, but there's always one fan that pays $1,000 for his album every single time.
Does he price it at that point, or somebody just pays $1,000?
He has $1,000 tier that always includes something different. So like I think one of the times was like, you get all the Pro Tools sessions to the album if you pay $1,000.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, again, this is your artist with the capital A. Like, but then again, like we see that happen every day on regular releases where like, every day we see a fan that pays over $1,000, like without a miss, just every day we see it.
And is that because, so it's almost like, if I'm understanding this correctly, it's kind of like how artists have structured Kickstarter campaigns or whatnot, and there's multiple tiers and it is buying. So are all of these campaigns, or I guess they're not campaigns, are all of them just like a sales page, but you did mention that there's subscription as well. How does that interact with what you're mentioning and like what most seem to be doing is selling things?
It's, again, if you've ever used a Shopify, think of Shopify but for like releases of content. Essentially, that's how Even's backend works. So you can create a release. We call them releases on the platform. This can be an EP, this can be an album, it can be a short film. And then you can say, is this a one-time payment? Is this a monthly subscription? The subscription model is called community, so Even communities. And that's essentially where fans can essentially, whether it's monthly, quarterly, you can position it to be yearly. And then we make it really easy for fans to buy. I think one of the big things that we invested a lot of time and resources to is we support 140 currencies and 30 global payment methods where fans from around the world can buy, and you can also set up regional pricing. So if you have an audience, let's say, you're an artist in the US, but you have a strong audience in Brazil, you can set your pricing to be different for fans in Brazil than the ones in the US. And that's been and they can pay in their native payment method as well. Now in the US, we also make it very easy to spend a lot. We, have Klarna, we have Affirm, Afterpay, you name it. We carry them on platform. And then of course, like Apple Pay, Google Pay, we make it very easy for fans to get from A to Z as quickly as possible.
Nice. No, that's great. That's super helpful. And so when you're putting something up, I mean, a lot of artists, especially those with the capital A, are releasing maybe an album every 3 years or something, or maybe it's an album a year these days or something like that. And they're not constantly putting stuff up for sale or maybe able to schedule a release. And so I look at this as like, okay, cool. They can do this once, maybe once every 3 years or once a year or something, but that doesn't really feel very sustainable. So now we're kind of back to, how is this sustainable, or are artists able to sustain on the money from from their fans via Even? And if so, how are they doing that? How are they structuring campaigns where you keep a revenue flowing?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is where we talk about the idea of like, it's not even or streaming, it's even and streaming. Even doesn't become your end all be all, right? Like the truth is that's just not where the industry is right now. I think, we are starting to see more and more artists trying to lean in towards like, where is the landscape right now? Like, how are people being discovered? How are you discovering audiences? So Even is just designed to be a part of your rollout. Again, we're starting to see artists that only go to even and don't go to streaming. We try to encourage them not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But we have artists that just release on even and it's always available for purchase. Most releases traditionally are only available for a short period of time. So 7, 30, maybe 60 days before the streaming release.
Okay.
But we do have releases that are only made available. Now, I think there is the subscription model ends up being like the model that we're starting to see artists do, where it's like a reoccurring revenue.
Yeah.
And we see artists that are successful with that, but it can be time consuming. You have to be ready to, even is also not for the hobbyist, right? Like this
Right.
is really about, do you want to build a business around your career?
Yeah.
And it can be for the hobbyist for like the one time thing that you do and you made a little bit of money and like it's done. But this is really designed to be, your theatrical release before Netflix. That's the
Got it.
analogy. It's like we're the movie theater. Spotify was Netflix. That's like the best way we can describe it.
Right on. And what data does the artist have access to? I'm assuming with their fans, they're getting like their emails and phone numbers and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, we give them all the
I'm
data is made
afraid to ask
available.
that. It's like it should be a given, but of course, we don't get that from Spotify. We don't get that from Ticketmaster.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild that we don't like. We're one of the only industries in the world where the seller doesn't have access to the buyers, doesn't have access to the customers when we're talking like ticket sales or
Yeah.
listeners on Spotify. So, okay, good. You're at least giving them their customer
They,
information.
they they get that and more. I mean, so much of what we do is also train artists, labels, and teams like how to actually use the data.
Yeah,
And we really use like real transactional data, right? So you not only get like the high level revenue, you also see how many views did your release get? What was your revenue per view? What was your conversion rate? What
mm,
was your streaming equivalent? People really love the streaming equivalent. We show them this is how many
yeah.
streams you would need. And
I
then, of
saw
course, we
that.
show them a
Yeah.
little bit more granular data. Like we'll show them total amount of streams per song, how many times each fan streamed, how much they paid, the sources of where the transactions came from, cities, countries. And then we have a tool called Fan Connect that allows them to send SMS and email notifications directly through the platform.
Nice.
So instead of having to, pay for like a MailChimp or a community, you can do that all in one place at no
Dope.
charge. So you only pay for your text messages whenever you send out a text message, but the
Wow.
platform is always free.
That's fantastic. I'm assuming that's just a US only thing for text messages. It gets a little complicated. No, you do it
No,
worldwide text
no, we do
SMS?
worldwide, yeah, and we
Wow.
do WhatsApp messages as well. So WhatsApp
Oh, that's great.
messages are newer,
Yeah.
primarily for like the global users.
Cool. That's great. And the fact, yeah, that you're not charging for that. I mean, community or I mean, there's a lot of these services
Mailchimp, Laylo, I mean, they could
lay
get
low, right?
expensive.
That's another one. They're very expensive. I mean, they start at like,
Yeah,
$50 to $100 a month minimum. Plus, if you have a list that's bigger, it can be a
yeah,
lot more. So, and then that's helpful, especially, you got new announces and merch, and tours and all of that stuff. Do they get like, I mean, how granular are we getting here? Do they get like their location data and stuff for tours and all of that? Okay.
yeah. They
Do
get
you
all of it.
rank the fans in terms of how much they've spent? Can I see like each fan, how much each fan has spent?
Yeah, I'll show you. I'll show you
Oh
really
yeah,
quickly.
screen share,
We'll,
great. If people that are
yeah,
watching this
we'll
on
probably
YouTube will be able to see this. Great.
we'll probably have to blur this,
Okay,
like the
we can
artist
blur
name.
it.
We can
So
blur
now you're seeing a blurred version of this, so
a
we won't mention the
blurred
artist name. But
version.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but this kind of gives you like the overview. So you see gross revenue, total sales, views, conversion,
Hmm.
every individual track, the fans, your top spending fans. You
Oh,
see the
cool.
countries of where the transactions are coming from. But then
Yeah,
you can get pretty granular with fans. Like you can see, you can sort them by how much they spent, highest
sweet.
spending, currencies that they're buying in. And then this is the Fan Connect tool where you can like actually send SMS and email notifications directly through
Got
the
it.
platform.
Hmm.
And it's designed to be, it's pretty comprehensive. Like in
Yeah.
many cases, like teams are fully replacing, like they're just not using MailChimp or Community at all
Wow.
to, release on the platform.
Yeah. No, that's great. Awesome. So I want to step back a little bit.
Please.
This is needed. I'm curious your background and kind of how you came to start this and get involved in all of this and get to the point of 8,000 artists a day, including many superstars and all of that. Yeah, give me a little background on you.
Yeah, I mean, man, I grew up in Milwaukee, born and raised. I came up
Go
as a
Bucks.
producer. Go Bucks, go Brewers.
Go
But
Brewers.
yeah, I came up as a producer, engineer. So in high school, two of my classmates were incredible artists.
Hmm.
One of them signed to Epic Records my junior year,
Okay.
and I was the quote unquote manager. Very
Yeah.
short lived. But my senior year, I started managing my main client. His name is Ishtar, so I managed him for 6 years, and that was kind of like what you know put me in the industry. Essentially, we
Hmm.
graduated May of 2012, and then we spent the next 6 years on the road.
Wow.
Very much like the SoundCloud era. So we were entering, like, my career started at the beginning of what became kind of like the streaming boom.
Yeah.
Um, and, I was a part of the managers that were involved when they were building Spotify for artists and when they were
Mm.
building Apple Music for artists. And, we were kind of, in that mix and in that world.
Yeah.
And, I really was fascinated by the streaming landscape. And I drank the Kool-Aid that was like streaming is going to save everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, like we were making money from streaming, right? Like we saw it firsthand. So I did that for 6 years. And then in 2018, after like touring for a ton, burnt out, moved back to Milwaukee. And I met these two guys who ran a venture firm called Generator. And they wanted to start an accelerator, but for artists and managers. And I thought that was really interesting. I thought it was like a shift in what I was already doing, where I could take everything I had learned and kind of just like help young artists and managers. It was supposed to be
Hmm.
like a summer thing, and it turned into me being there for 5 years. But it was a very successful program. So we launched it in Milwaukee. It expanded to Detroit, Cleveland. We were incubating a couple dozen artists and managers, hosting free workshops. And yeah, we had a lot of success on that side. And then that turned into Generator partnering with Universal, initially for our Motown program, which was the accelerator in Detroit, but then it turned
Hmm.
into a music tech program that Generator operated inside of the Capitol building in partnership with Universal. And that
Hmm.
was really my initial exposure to like working with music tech startups. And since I was overseeing the music program, I was like pretty much in the mix of it all. During that time, I think probably the most interesting thing is I was meeting these founders who were building, you know, the best way I describe it is they were building Ferraris that no one wanted to drive. And a big part of my job was trying to help them explain why no one wanted to drive their Ferraris. Um, and there was a very clear disconnect, and I'm sure you've seen it in the past, right? It's like there's a product that sounds like it's going to solve a very clear problem, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of unwritten rules in the industry, and a lot of written rules that a lot of people don't understand. And all of a sudden, it becomes very complex, very complicated. So around this time, I wrote a white paper. It was called "The Music Industry Needs to Get Even." I ended up sending it to the folks at Generator, and the founders pulled me aside and they're like, Mag, we think you should actually give it a shot and go build this.
Mm.
So they wrote me a check. They kept me on salary for a year and moved me to LA. And I started building Even. So it's a combination of like being a manager, seeing firsthand the problems, then helping artists and managers, seeing the music tech, the venture world, and kind of taking all of those like unique experiences,
Yeah.
and turning it into what Even is now. So I always make the joke that I'm really like not an expert at anything. I'm just like really good at kind of seeing gaps and start
Yeah.
putting pieces together. And yeah, our first artist on the platform was LaRussell. This was back in October of 2022.
Mm.
Um, couldn't
And
have
how did
picked
you
a
get
better
LaRussell on the
partner.
platform then?
Just started calling my network.
Okay.
So our first artist was LaRussell, second artist was Destin Conrad, and then our third artist was French Montana.
Okay.
So we did that over the span. This is like our MVP launch.
Hmm.
But we just started calling, you know, my mentors and friends and people, most of them were telling me, Mag, you're crazy. Absolutely not. Do not build this. But if you're going to build it, like, let me introduce you to some people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it worked. In our first month, we took an artist who, LaRussell, had only made 30,000 in total streaming revenue over the span
Hmm.
of 3 years. He made 100,000 on the platform his first 30 days on the platform,
Incredible.
which completely changed his life and the trajectory of where his career went. And now we've done 13 albums with him since.
Hmm.
So in the past 2.5 years. And yeah, 2023 was a closed beta. We did 56 releases. We tested
Hmm.
the model with singles, EPs, mixtapes, you name it. And then we officially launched out of beta April of last year. So we're entering year one
Year
since
one.
launching out of beta. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Amazing. That's great. I'm curious, you have artists on here who are both DIY, self-release, independent. You also have major label artists. J. Cole is on with Interscope under UMG. Um, how does that work in terms of the indie versus the major? And are you, everyone in the industry is talking about super fandom right now, especially the majors. And
Yeah.
I fear, as someone who is very independent minded and focused, and is just been frustrated time and time again as the majors have manipulated every single tech platform and every single organization out there and bent them to their will and to their benefit, not for
Yeah.
the artist benefit. As much as they like to spout off artist centric, it's all double speak. Like, none of what they're doing is artist centric. It's all label centric, and it's all for the benefit of the majors. Um, how are you handling that so the majors don't bend you to their will? And then how to also you work with these major label artists, because there's just a lot more complications when it comes to all of that, and artists aren't really entitled to their sales until they recoup their royalties, and then the label's supposed to pay out the sales, all of that.
I mean, I think, I'll give you like my honest perspective on it. I think
Yeah.
there's power in numbers. We went out building even for the everyday artist. My internal vision and mission at Even is I want to help 1 million artists every year who've never made money from music make their first $1,000. Like, that to me is my mission.
Hmm.
And I think we started to prove that momentum. We built such a strong community of like independent emerging artists. And that started with just like truly just DIY. And then it turned into like the independent with maybe a distributor, right?
Yeah.
And then it turned into the established, newly independent artist joining the platform. And over time, like, we started talking to the major labels really early. Luminate gave us the stamp of approval with our launch. We're the first and only Superfan platform that reports to Billboard through Luminate, and like having their support, that gave us the opportunity to say, hey, look, we can do this thing, but we're going to do it on our terms.
Yeah.
And we want to help everyday artists really get there. I think the market is in a different place than 10 years ago and even 15 years ago when like Spotify hit the scene, where
Sure.
the market share is going to be close to 50% independent in the next 2 to 3 years.
Hmm.
You're seeing the major labels really trying to go into the indie sector because there's so much power, especially at a global level.
Hmm.
And I think for us, it's like, as long as that stays intact, we can play ball with everyone, and we want to play ball with everyone.
Mm.
Our model works for everyone, but it has to fall within um, the framework that we have built, and we
Right.
haven't bent our framework for anyone,
Mm.
mostly because, like, the truth is, um, I think the business has changed. I think the people inside of the buildings have changed. I can't tell you that like I've ever had a conversation with a label executive that I was just like, oh my god, this feels like the industry I heard about from the 90s. Like, a lot of the executives that I talk to inside of the buildings really understand the power of nurturing fans and
Yeah.
giving their artists an opportunity to, truly own that relationship. And I think it's like social media has made it really easy for artists to have more power than ever before.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you know, I think that's really where the power lies right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's how we built our business. We, you know, didn't take investment from any of the major labels. We're the Switzerland in the space where, we
Right.
work with everyone and we want to
Yeah.
work with everyone. But I think it's artists first every day. Hopefully that makes
That
sense.
No, and that's great to hear. I'm curious, just on like a operational kind of logistical standpoint. How does it work for labels? Like if an artist is signed, even to an indie major, whatever, there's different implications on how the record sales work. A self-release indie artist, it's easy. I might put up a digital album. Make a subscription where you get my album for free. I might package a T-shirt with the album and exclusive access to my documentary. Whatever. It's all money for me. I'm just going to come up with a bunch of different options. But with labels, there's different implications. A sale of a digital record is very different from a sale of a T-shirt, which the label oftentimes doesn't get a piece of unless they have a 360 deal. Advanced tickets, the labels aren't really touching that at all. If you get a subscription where you get a package, an album, and they're like, how does it work logistically with labels, signed artists versus indie artists?
Yeah, I mean, I think to take it even a step back before that, we start with the framework for songwriters first, right? So
Okay.
we build out a framework, we pay out the PROs, we pay out the MLC, and we
Oh,
essentially
wow.
categorize a sale of a unit on the platform as a specific number. So the number that we follow right now is the actual sale of an album is $4.99 on the platform, which is the
Okay.
wholesale price of an album.
Yeah.
Everything else is categorized as what we consider access revenue. So this can
Huh.
be exclusive access to the video. This can be, merchandise. Now, we only offer the framework. So our job is to offer the framework to partners. It's up to them to essentially, very rarely do we get involved in the business of like our partners.
Yeah.
The same way that we don't get involved in the business of like an emerging artist who like sets up their splits on the platform.
Sure.
We're here to like provide a framework that they can follow. Um, our biggest thing is we understand how record deals look. We understand how distribution deals work. And we make it very clearly for teams to categorize what is revenue that everyone is entitled to and what revenue is revenue that you're not entitled to. But the benefit is the biggest struggle that labels and even some distributors face when we think about the superfan strategy, it never feels natural
Mm.
until even. And, that's not me quoting that. That's like how folks say, like, man, even makes this feel very natural to us where we can fit our business into it. The artist can really lean into it and feel like it's theirs and
Yeah.
own that relationship, especially for the bigger artists that have like a bigger engine behind them. There's kind of like the best of both worlds in it, and everyone walks away feeling really good about the experience. And maybe it's the name, right? Like, I think we really lean into the name of like even. It's supposed to feel that way.
Sure.
But I can't tell you I can't tell you a single experience that we've ever had with a label or distributor or an artist where people walked away feeling like that didn't feel fair, right? Like that
Yeah,
just
it's
didn't.
interesting. I looked at a few artists and how they were integrating it to their social media or whatnot, or like pointing people on Instagram to it. Is it white labeled for everyone? I mean, we talked about J. Cole and he has his like inevitable platform, and as I'm clicking through J. Cole's offerings, there wasn't even branding really anywhere. I could tell it was even because I had already gone through the sign up process. I'm like, oh, this looks the same. Um, but is that a feature just for J. Cole, or is it white labeled for everybody and you don't necessarily need to download or create a sign up for even or download the app or whatever?
So we have two sides to the business. We have Even Marketplace, which is primarily what we're known for. So that's like the even.biz releases.
Hmm.
And then we have Even Studio, which is like the custom releases. That's a feature that we just introduced with J. Cole, but now we have others.
Okay.
We did like Smino, Black.
Mhm.
We just did one with Duckworth that were getting a lot of momentum. Kevin
Cool.
Gates. So that's Jesse Reyes just went out last week. And that essentially, that model is you can take all the elements of Even, but do them in a custom environment. That will be
Mhm.
available to all artists in Q4 of this year.
Great.
But the idea is that like we have artists that want to be a part of an ecosystem, like a
Yeah.
marketplace. And then we have artists that are just like, I want to put this in my own world with my
Right.
own spin on it.
Right.
And there's elements that I want, there's elements that I don't want. So it's really at the discretion of the artist what direction they want to go in.
Are you
Um,
seeing any fans that are jumping from community to community? Because I think that was always the selling point that I never saw come to fruition with like Patreon. You know, when Patreon first came out there, they're like, here, we are this platform and you're going to have fans come in and want to become patrons of all these different creators. But really, it's not. It's like you're a fan of one creator, you're going to be a patron of them. And then maybe if you're a fan of another one and they happen to be on Patreon, okay, now I'm a patron on Patreon of two creators, but it's not because Patreon convinced me to do it. It's because I'm a fan of that creator.
Honestly, up until last summer, we didn't even have an explore page. We
Yeah,
were just operating. It was fans reaching out to us and saying, like, the number one feedback that we got from fans was, I want to see what else is on the platform.
interesting.
So our current explore page is like the early elements of like how we're thinking about discovery.
Cool.
And a lot of what you'll see is we feature exclusive access as like its own category of discovery, where like, you know, we'll have an artist that's doing a guitar giveaway, and you're like, oh, who a guitar giveaway? Who's
Yeah.
Jordan Hawkins? And then you click on it, and all of a sudden, oh, there's a single. So it's a way to discover music based on experiences, and that's where teams can get really creative on like the experiences that they can offer. So it's a lot of what we're leaning towards. A lot of what you'll see this year on the platform is free community spaces that
Hmm.
aren't monetized. We're doing a lot of, you know, more bringing in just elements of culture into these community spaces where we found that fans want to interact with other fans across like,
I still
without
think
getting
you
too
should
deep.
monetize that. That's the one thing you got that nobody else has is just like you
Oh, no,
got to
no, no.
pay a
I mean,
dollar or something to get them in.
one thing I'm thinking about the community aspect that has nothing to do with an artist or a release, right? So
Oh, I see. Okay, not
I'll
tied
plant
to
a
an
seed.
artist. Okay, okay. Got it.
I'll plant a seed that again you can quote me on later on, but we want to launch, like, for example, during the Grammys. We can have the Grammys
Ah,
community space
got
where
it.
you can
Got it.
see all the nominations. Fans can talk about,
Talk
hey,
about
I
that.
think this is,
And then
yeah.
maybe you can
So
see like, oh, that's a J. Cole fan, or that's a Duckworth fan, or that's a LaRussell fan, and then
it,
you see what community that they're actually a member of, and they're in this
exactly.
cultural space or whatever. That's cool. I dig that. No, but I was saying I like that there's a barrier of entry for these fans, in that they have to pay something to become a
Yep.
member of the community, because then you're just gonna get trolls, and then you're just like Instagram, and you're like everything else. But
No,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
yeah,
cool.
no, for sure, for sure. I think the idea, and these community spaces will only be available to fans who have purchased something in the past. So
That
there's
makes
still going to be a
sense.
barrier of entry
Yeah.
to really eliminate that noise, right? We've
Yeah.
never had to block a single user on the platform
Huge.
ever.
Incredible.
So I think, you know, a lot of that is tied to the fact that like very rarely will people pay to hate. You know, it's as
Yeah.
corny as that sounds, but
And no, but also like not only that, you're putting a lot of information when you're signing up. It's not just, you're tied to your phone number and your email and your credit card and your name and
yeah,
sometimes your billing address. And like if you're gonna be an asshole, like you know where they live, like you know their credit cards, like that no one's gonna do that. And so I think the reason that people are assholes around the internet is the anonymity, which you kind of remove that when they're paying for something and they have to put in all that information. And so I think that's great. That's super helpful. um
yeah.
Right on. Well, that's so cool, Mag. Thank you for chatting about all of this. I am really leaning in this year to the Superfan platforms, and just like I think everybody knows that this is where the industry is heading. And you're my first conversation of like all
Wow.
of the Superfan platforms that I'm now inviting on to the show, because I've just been fascinated and intrigued. And impressed with what you've built, and it's I think this is like so important, and the numbers speak for themselves. But I think every artist needs to like really start to lean into this space, whether they're going to use Even or any of the other platforms that exist right now, because there are quite a few, and listeners will start to hear from some of the other ones too. But it's like, I think we're all in this industry together, and like this is really important. I think we've established that streaming works for some, works for passive listenership, doesn't really work for monetizing the fan artist relationship. And we really need those mechanisms for the industry to thrive and survive, and for artists to thrive and survive. And so major props, and thank you for building this. And yeah, I'm excited to see where we head with it.
Man, thank you so much. And whenever you got a new project coming, man, give me a call. You know?
I will. Well, I have one final question that I ask everyone who comes on the show, and that is, what does it mean to you to make it in the new music business?
I saw that on the invitation, and you know, on my walk home from the gym, I was thinking about it, and I think for me, if you would have asked me this 10 years ago, when like my career was barely kicking, you know, or really getting its start, I probably would have said like, I would love a plaque, I would love a this or whatever, you know, I want a Grammy. I think now I get so much like personal joy out of knowing that I'm doing good business and doing good work and helping artists, which I know traditionally most people who have made it in the business can't, like somewhere along the line, something happened, right? Like you maybe signed someone to a shitty deal, you maybe did something that you weren't proud of, you know, and I've had these conversations with people before. And I love the fact that for me, my making it every day is more like a thing that I rent. It's not something that I own, in the sense that like every day it's like I have to remind myself that for me to continue to stay at this bar, for me, is to continue to do good business, keep artists in mind, do stuff that makes me feel good. And like I could go to bed and like, you know, not stress out about it. I know that's a long answer, but that to me is like, making it is never the destination. It's more of like the journey of every day reminding yourself that this is what we do it for. Because we work in music, and it's like, this is, you know, there's no industry like this. And I feel like we all, if we keep the purity of the music at the forefront of what we do and the artistry, I think this industry is capable of incredible things that, you know, we can't even imagine.
Love it. And I agree with this. Thank you so much. That's great. Today's episode was edited by Ari Davids, with music by Grassroots District, and produced by all the great people at Ari's Take.